Hello, everybody. Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning, a very, very special live episode of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, January 11th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game is in 233 days. The game against Michigan in 324 days. Oh boy, is there some stuff to talk about today. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff. 3 Ohio State Buckeyes announced they're going to be back for the 2024 season. A change on the Ohio State coaching staff, a new hire on the Ohio State coaching staff, some rumors about potential future changes on the Ohio State coaching staff. And oh, by the way, maybe, probably, almost definitely the greatest coach in the history of college football announces that he's going to be retiring. Oh boy, is there stuff to talk about. We're going to be talking about it with Tony Gerdeman and shortly with Kevin Noon of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony, are you the Nick Saban of Ohio State podcasting, or are you the Parker Fleming of Ohio State podcasting? Two names in the news today. Which one would you say better fits you and your milieu?
No, I would say neither. I would say because one thing I can do is I can succeed in the Big Ten, whereas Nick Saban could not. So I'm not saying I'm better than Nick Saban. I'm just saying he couldn't do what I do. And I think there's proof of that because he isn't. So there you go.
There you go. What else could there be? Tony Gerdeman able to deliver in the upper Midwest. Nick Saban, I mean, he's with the Browns and then he got fired and then he was with the Michigan State and had one pretty good evening in Central Ohio in early November of 1998. We'll get to that. But first, we got to talk about some of the other, more specifically, Ohio State news today. And not one, not two, 3 Buckeyes announced they are back for the 2024 season. We're going to start with the offensive line. Donovan Jackson, he did not have the single greatest season. Really no one on the offensive line had the single greatest season. But for Donovan Jackson to be back, Tony, that feels like that just sort of crosses one really significant line off of the potential to-do list for Ohio State in terms of filling an open position. Getting Donovan Jackson back feels like that's kind of like a sneaky, low-key, pretty big deal.
Yeah, imagine the alternative without him. And then you start getting worried about what are they going to do. So having him back eliminates an issue of trying to figure out who it would be. Because, Tom, I couldn't tell you right now who it would be at left guard if there's no Donovan Jackson. Shoot, remember a year ago we were talking about him as being potentially the Ohio State left tackle, to give you an idea of the athleticism and the potential of him. So getting him back at left guard, regardless of the year he had or didn't have this past year, is huge, not just because now you don't have to worry about it, but you don't have to worry about what could have been. And because it wouldn't have been good. It wouldn't have been as good as this, especially now with the portal, being what it is. Like if they didn't have Donovan Jackson coming back, remember the panic that was in Ryan Day's voice last winter about the offensive line? There would be some panic in the voice about the interior of the Ohio State offensive line without him coming back. And so you get him, it's going to be a senior, a 3-year starter at that, at some point next year. So just a very big thing for an offensive line that has received a bunch of criticism for a very poor showing in the Cotton Bowl, but I think is trending towards being better than it was this past season.
Yeah, for sure. And it feels like if you got Donovan Jackson in, you can kind of write him in with Penn there or Sharpie at your left guard position. Feels like Josh Simmons has probably pretty much got the left tackle spot more or less locked down. You can pretty much write him in there with Sharpie as well. You got a couple options at center. Whether you've both, neither guy is an absolute lock, but you got a couple guys who have started this year, and a guy who spent a couple of years starting for Nick Saban as an option there. Right guard, that's the only spot that we know is going to be open, but again, you've got a couple options there. It just feels like there's a little more stability, a little more security, a few more options there where they can kind of mix and match. As we hear them say every year, it's about finding the best 5. It feels like there's just, with Donovan Jackson there, he's going to be one of the best 5, but that just increases the number of options and this guy can't play tackle, but he could play guard, or this guy can, play guard and center. There's just more options to find who your best 5 are there. So that's going to be a very big piece for them going into the spring and summer. They got some good news on the defensive side of the ball as well. one of the best cornerback rooms in the country. Is that too strong, Tony? One of the best cornerback rooms in the country? Yeah, for 2023. They're bringing back all three guys there, all three starters there for 2024. Jordan Hancock announced after we finished our afternoon live show talking about what a big deal it was that Denzel Burke was coming back. Jordan Hancock announced he also coming back. So Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, both announcing on Wednesday that they are coming back. And then you get David Sigmanosin as back as well. That just feels, I don't know. I was trying to think through best Ohio State cornerback rooms ever. And that's a pretty good, best Ohio State cornerback seasons ever, maybe. I think best ever is probably too high a bar, but this is potentially a top 5 best Ohio State cornerback unit just with those three guys. I don't know that you have 2 future, top half of the first round picks in there, but that's a pretty darn good Ohio State cornerback unit that addresses a lot of the potential concerns about the back end of that defense next year.
When you say best cornerback rooms in Ohio State history, I immediately think a lot of people would think back to, I don't know, was it the 2016 with like Denzel Ward and Guerrieri Conley and who else at that point, or 2018 with Guerrieri Conley and Jeff Okudah and Sean Wade or Damon Arnett. My first thought was 1996, Tom. Ty Howard, Antoine Winfield, Sean Springs, Ahmed Plummer. Like, those are all legit dudes. And this one could be right up there because we're not even talking about Jermaine Mathis, and he would be starting at Ohio State next year, I think, in any other year.
Yeah, and Jermaine Mathis is someone who may be a little more delayed in terms of getting on the field. He tweeted out an emoji that, if I have read my hieroglyphics correctly, is basically he's locked in. So no concern there in terms of Jermaine Mathis leaving. But Kevin Noon joins us, by the way. Hi, Kevin. If you do have Jermaine Mathis as your fourth corner, I just go back. You only have to go back 2 seasons to the 2022 season when Ohio State got to their fourth corner pretty darn early in the season. That was probably Jair Brown, and he was starting in, the 4th game of the season as a true freshman. If Jermaine Mathis is your fourth corner and you can rotate guys or you can have some more depth in case a guy misses a week or two, boy, oh boy, again, now you're not talking best top 3, it's one of the best top 3 corner groups in recent Ohio State history. You're potentially talking maybe the best top 4 Ohio State corner group in the last decade, something like that. That just feels like it's just a little more insurance for Ohio State to go past that top 3 and still have Jermaine Mathis and some of the other guys they got in that room as well.
As we said on one of the 7 shows that we've done today, there could be a lot of football to be played this year with the 12-team playoff and more rounds potentially. And if Ohio State ends up winning the Big Ten, you had a 13th game right off the bat. I would like to have more depth at these positions. We talk about a pair and a spare, and when you're playing 2 corners, a pair and a spare, wouldn't that be 6 corners, or just based off of 2? And then, if you're playing 3 corners, if your nickel is actually a corner, I mean, we're getting into advanced math here and things that, my math 050 at Ohio State isn't going to get this covered. So, I don't think that there's any real concern that Jermaine Mathis is going to wither away from boredom on the bench. I think he will get enough run for sure.
Advanced math is when Kevin has to take his socks off. Sue in the chat mentions Calvin Simpson-Hunt, and he is, presumably number 5 there in that rotation. And really, when we're talking about corners, Jordan Hancock's in the slot. That's sort of a safety. He's not entirely a corner. Calvin Simpson-Hunt, Jermaine Mathis is sort of the next man up potentially as the outside corners. Calvin Simpson-Hunt, another guy who you go through last year, and remember Jair Brown, who started that Wisconsin game in 2022? He is now at LSU, and one of the reasons is it feels like Calvin Simpson-Hunt may be past him on the depth chart. They like him a lot as well. Tons of speed to burn there. And, again, if you don't have to throw a second-year guy out there as a starter, that's a good thing. You potentially have work him into more of a rotation there. That is a very, very deep and very, very talented room there at corner for Ohio State in 2024 with the returns of Jordan Hancock and Denzel Burke. So that was part of the news on Wednesday. Now let's move on to the news that I think a large section, based on the retweets on the tweet from BuckeyeHuddle.com, the news that a lot of Ohio State fans were waiting for quite a while. There is a change in the Ohio State coaching staff coming for the special teams unit. Parker Fleming out. He will not be back for his final season of his contract going into 2024. That opens up another spot on the Ohio State coaching staff. Not really a surprise, Kevin. This is news that, first of all, the sort of initial leak late last week from Football Scoop said, yeah, there's probably going to be a change on the special teams unit, which he did. There's only one guy on the special teams unit. So that makes that a pretty easy piece of math to do with or without your shoes on. It doesn't, I don't think this is a big surprise. It does feel like this is something that just needed to do, a change that needed to be made so that we could, Ohio State could potentially balance that coaching staff out a little bit, bringing on another defensive coach potentially.
Yeah, and we'll get to the super chat in a minute. A very important super chat from super poster Jordan Kapler, because 24 to hell with Orr. Yeah, it was very, I think it was a move that needed to be made on so many different levels. Special teams was not good. I made a post, I think, on the huddle board saying that if special teams were uncoached, we probably would have had about the same results. And I know maybe that's a little harsh, but the special teams results were not very good this year. And it gives you the opportunity, as Tom had mentioned, to rebalance your staff, get maybe the right people into the right roles, and kind of get on with your lives. And I think that's going to be important for the Buckeyes with some of the other changes that have been rumored or whatever may be as Ohio State retools and gets ready for 24 with a certainly much more bolstered roster of veteran players, and we'll see. We'll see what's in the cards for coaches.
Tom, you mentioned the retweets. I hope Parker Fleming does not look at Twitter to that tweet from Buckeye Huddle and look at the quote tweets and the replies. A lot of celebrating going on the internet when that news broke, and but it was time. It kind of had to happen.
Well, I think there were a couple different elements to why this was a change that a lot of people were sort of anticipating was going to happen, and why people were maybe relatively happy to see it happen. One is a lot of teams don't have a dedicated special teams coach. And if you have a dedicated special teams coach, you would certainly expect to see something pretty remarkable out of the special teams. If you're the guy who's in charge of just this one thing, basically, yeah, he worked a little with the secondary too, but he was the special teams coordinator. If you were the special teams coordinator and some teams don't have a special teams coordinator, you would expect, if you're going to dedicate that resource and that staff position, because the number of accountable assistants is capped at 10. Those are the guys who can go on the road and recruit. So if you're going to dedicate one of those to be a special teams coach, you would expect to see something remarkable out of the special teams, at least every once in a while. And it felt like every time you noticed the Ohio State special teams, it was, oops, we ran the wrong fake punt. Oops, we ran a fake punt where we weren't supposed to. Oops, our returner caught the ball on the 5. Oops, we missed another field goal. Oops. It was just, oops, I did it again in a remix that no one was asking for. So that, I think, is part of the conversation. The other part, obviously, that you want to balance the staff, where you had 5 of the accountable assistants on the offensive side of the ball, plus a head coach on the offensive side of the ball, 1 guy on special teams, and then 4 assistants on the defensive side of the ball. So it was really kind of like 5.5, 4, and 1. That is not a formation that is going to work in soccer. It is not a formation that is going to work really particularly well in college football. They seem like they may be on track to rectify that a little bit, because as they announced that Parker Fleming was no longer going to be a member of the staff, they also announced that Matt Guerrieri is going to be back as a member of the staff. Tony, he has worked, 7 years prior with Jim Knowles at a couple different stops, including Duke. He actually was a QC guy at Ohio State a couple years ago, before very briefly being the Manny Diaz stay at Temple kind of stay as a defensive coordinator under Kevin Wilson at Tulsa, before then being the co-DC at Indiana, before then Tom Allen and crew got all were let go at the end of the season. This feels like, we talk a lot about alignment. This feels like a hire where, okay, if you have Matt Guerrieri running your safety room and he's worked with Jim Knowles for 7 years, and Jim Knowles presumably played a significant role in bringing him back, it feels like you maybe have your alignment sorted out, at least on that front.
Yeah, one of his guys knows his defense, knows what he wants to do. A guy that Jim Knowles obviously trusts. And while the Ohio State safeties were very good this year, I don't think they were very good in 2022. I think Ronnie Hickman dipped, and that's why it's kind of so surprising he's playing so well in Cleveland right now, is because you didn't expect that based on what we saw from him last year. Lathan Ransom, Josh Proctor had injuries and things like that, but both of those guys were outstanding this year. Sonny Styles was very good. So I thought the safeties were a pretty big surprise this year, and I think a lot of that credit obviously goes to Perry Eliano. But when we talked to Ryan Day, was it signing day, when talking about the assistant coaches, what's the number one thing they need to do? And I think he said recruit. And that's something that Perry Eliano struggled with in landing the top guys. Ohio State could get visits. They just couldn't get the guys signed in terms of the 5 stars. And so I think all of that finally came home to roost. But, we have no idea, can Matt Guerrieri recruit? He's been at Duke for most of his career. And as you said, Indiana this past year. Hard to judge what a guy does at those two places. So we'll see. Younger guy will be able to relate to the players, as they say. But, that's – I guess you get a couple of years to find out. Is this going to be a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal? Most assistant coaches don't get beyond 2 years in terms of their contract. So you got to put up or shut up pretty quickly.
And so now you have Matt Guerrieri in. He obviously sliding in for the Perry Eliano spot as the safeties coach. With Parker Fleming gone, now there is another open spot on the coaching staff available for someone. And I think all year we sort of assumed, okay, Parker Fleming out, James Laurinaitis in, bing, bang, boom, nice, easy 1-for-1 swap. And now you're sort of hearing, Kevin, this may be a not so fast, my friend situation. A lot of smoke around the fact that James Laurinaitis may stay as a GA for another year, a graduate assistant, not be one of those 10 countable coaches. And there has been also a lot of smoke around one particular name, a rather big name, defensive line coach, who seems like maybe there might be some kind of a plan in the works for potentially some kind of a transition whenever Larry Johnson decides to hang him up. So what have you heard on that you can share?
Yes, definitely. I'll do that. And then we'll get to after we comment on that, we'll get to the super chat of Jordan Kapler. Certainly a name that's been thrown around is Jason Taylor, the former NFL player who's currently the D-line coach at the University of Miami, Florida, not Ohio. And there seems to be some genuine interest there. Ohio State has definitely bent his ear. I have talked to sources on both sides of things there, and everybody is telling me that there is very real conversation going on, and this would be a position of where you come in and be in like some sort of co-position with Larry, and you are the future. You are going to be the guy that it's going to be handed off to. You will then have the continuity that is necessary in recruiting. Maybe that helps bridge some of the things that have happened with losses of guys like Dylan Stewart and Marquise Lightfoot and Justin Scott, and then going back a year, Keon Keeley, and maybe another bite at that apple, and we'll talk about that one in a minute. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there, because once names start to rise to the surface to that point that I can get multiple people to talk to me, and off the record again, but not burning any sources here by talking about this. It seems that a lot of the due diligence has been done, and this is something that's either going to be thumbs up or thumbs down. And in relatively short order, in my opinion. Now, are we going to get another news dump day on Thursday or Friday like we had today? The part of me that doesn't like to work says, I sure hope not. The part of me that likes to stay employed says, yes, let's get another one of those. I'm fine doing 6 shows in a day. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see for that.
I think a lot of people associate Jason Taylor with his time with the Miami Dolphins as a pro. In college, he was an Akron Zip, and I think he's a Western Pennsylvania guy, if I remember correctly. So coming to the Midwest would not be a completely, a complete unknown. It wouldn't be a completely random move for him to be, if he did end up coming up to Ohio State. And you think about all the different guys that Miami has sort of poached from Ohio State over the last few cycles, guys who Ohio State either thought they were going to get or who Ohio State was maybe leading for, or Ohio State was maybe had committed at one point, who then ended up down at Miami. You wonder if Jason Taylor makes a trip from Miami to Columbus, maybe you get some guys down there rethinking some decisions, and maybe you get a player or two out of it as well. So that's the Ohio State coaching news. Before we get to the big all caps national coaching news, let's address Jordan Kapler Super Chat. He says, if I'm understanding this correctly, Tony and Kevin are the pair, and that makes Tom the spare, but one of those little donut ones, right? Yeah, let me tell you something. You got a flat tire out in the middle of nowhere, you're happy for any spare you got. Am I wrong, gentlemen?
You're going about 30 miles an hour. You have to have your blinkers on. You're probably pulling to the left into traffic. I mean, it's just not a good situation. I mean, you may as well use Fix-A-Flat or call AAA or something like that. Using the donut is just it's not recommended. It's not recommended. Use in last resort.
Plus, you're only supposed to use it for like 50 miles, and this is at least the 4th time we've used it, and it's got at least 600 miles on it. So
it's as bald as my head.
How far can you drive on a flat? Maybe employ that part of it. But can we just start calling Tom Little Donut? Is that your rap name?
I'm just thinking of the John Belushi Little Chocolate Donuts commercial now, which that feels maybe more fitting.
He's trying to
all
make
right, so
cool, but it's not.
All
right, so now we got to talk. We got to talk about the big news of the day. The big news of the day: Nick Saban hanging it up, retiring as the head coach of Alabama. There are a million different directions we can go with this one. I think we have to start with Nick Saban and Ohio State, his history with Ohio State. 2 games that Ohio State fans probably not going to want to think about. 1 game that Ohio State fans consider one of their very favorite games probably to think about over the last few years. Tony, which one do you want to start with? Do you want to do this sequentially? Do we want to do this in terms of favorite Ohio State memories to least favorite? Do we want to get the bad one out of the way first? One of the bad ones out of the way first? Which one do you want to do first?
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and get the bad one out of the way first. And I'm still not totally unconvinced that if Nick Saban and Michigan State do not win that game in 1998, he is not back in 1999. That then allows him to get the LSU job, because I think he finished with like 7-6 in 98, something like that. And obviously that 6-6. Yeah. So there you go. So that was a very big win, and it hadn't been a super successful couple of years for Saban there, but they got that win, and he turned it into, boy, that guy cashed that win in. He's cashed in. That's like not unlike Mel Tucker cashing in like one little thing into a big payday. Nick Saban turned that win into like 7 car dealerships, which is pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing. You go back and you think head coach of Toledo for 1 year. I mean, Nick Saban coaching at Toledo and Urban Meyer coaching at Bowling Green. It's like, boy, those are some big names in Northwest Ohio. And then, goes from Toledo to the Cleveland Browns, to Michigan State, to LSU, to the Miami Dolphins, and then Alabama. And undoubtedly going to be remembered as one of, if not the greatest coaches in college football history. But Kevin, he did lose the first night game in college football playoff history in the 2014 season. I can't. Were you there? Were you at that game? Okay. What? go ahead and after Tony brought the mood down, why don't you bring everyone back up with the 2015 Sugar Bowl?
Thank you. I'm glad I'm able to follow up after Tony, who is known internally as Buzz Killington. The 2014 game was something. Alabama was the 1, Ohio State was the 4. Obviously, as we're reliving all these good memories, Ohio State, down to its third quarterback with Cardale Jones, goes into Indy and beats Wisconsin 59-0, goes to the Sugar Bowl to take on heavily favored Alabama. It was supposed to be a wipeout, and even as the game kind of started, Ohio State was moving the ball and having to settle for 3, and we know that's never going to be good. And then the Buckeyes poured it on. Zeke Elliott had some sort of run through the South, and then for whatever reason, Urban got greedy and tried to go deep late to try and drive the dagger right through their heart, did not connect there. Alabama scores, and then Alabama has the ball once again with a shot to win at the end of the game. Tyvis Powell, everybody's favorite, steps in, makes the play, and then starts running, and everybody in scarlet and gray in the Superdome is yelling, "Just go down already." They do. Celebration ensues, and Ohio State goes on to win the first college football playoff. And what I will remember most out of that game is that some way, somehow, Lane Kiffin talked Nick Saban into stop running Derrick Henry for whatever reason, and that was a big focal point as Derrick Henry was really problematic.
Yeah, Lane Kiffin, you always think of Lane Kiffin throwing his play sheet in the air in celebration for, when they score a touchdown. I think Ohio State's defensive coaching staff was throwing their play sheets in the air in celebration as they forgot they had Derrick Henry and thought, Jake Coker, that's the money. That's how this game's going to get won. Interesting that Lane Kiffin is now one of those names that you're seeing on the lists in terms of who's going to replace Nick Saban at Alabama. I guess let's take a quick run. Everyone just throw out your name. Who is it going to be? I am going to say I think Dan Lanning from Oregon might be the guy I think is the most likely to end up there, but I have seen pretty good arguments for several other names as well.
Buzz,
go ahead.
No, I'm giving it to you, Buzz.
Okay, Buzz. I'm with you, Dan Lanning or Hugh Freeze, one of those two. We'll see. I'm torn. I'm torn.
I'm not sure what part of that is funniest.
All of it.
Dan Lanning is the choice there, in my opinion. And real quick, back to when I was a civilian, way back when I worked, one of my coworkers, his wife was the niece of Nick Saban, and when he signed his new deal with LSU, and he was already the highest paid college football coach, and I was just looking at it now. His new deal paid him $1.6 million a year back in 2001, 2002. So 20 years later, and you could have paid him $20 million a year at Alabama, and he still would have been a bargain.
As for my replacement, obviously, I think Lanning is the betting favorite right now. I think that Lane Kiffin has kind of been waiting in a holding pattern for that job to open up. Will he get the opportunity? I also know that Dabo Swinney had been rumored to be the heir apparent until Clemson started to go a little downhill, and Dabo does not have visions of NIL and things of that in his dreams. So I don't think that he is the guy. I go round and round, but I think Lane Kiffin is the guy that makes sense to me. 2014 notwithstanding.
It would be entertaining.
Yeah, it would definitely be entertaining. Whoever it is, and I don't think they're going to go for Kiffin. I think Kiffin has not quite established himself as, let's just say, a grown-up for long enough that it's worth, that he's probably going to be someone who's in there. But I think whoever that is, you don't ever want to be the guy after the guy, right? That feels like that never works out.
For $7 million a year, does it matter? For you're going to sign a 4 or 5 year deal, so this is going to be $25 to $40 million. I'll be the guy after the guy. I'll be the guy after Nick Saban for that, and when I get fired after 4 years, I'll end up going back to, I don't know, Syracuse and rebuilding from there, or just, do TV or whatever else. Like, you can do whatever you want after one contract at Alabama.
I want to read the super chat because I want to read it as is. As somebody took it down. Speedman 606. Sorry, not sorry. You guys ate boring and sick. Booey. Well, thank you for your $2, Speedman. You know type so good.
New rule on super chats: they need to be at least $5 and in English. All right, next up, let's talk about the potential recruiting impact of Nick Saban not being the head coach of Alabama. All right, super chat, quick for Treasurer Tour. This is Buckeye Huddle for you, Kevin. You'll always be my brother. I always support you. Always have, and will continue to. So please, as McChicken, where he will do the same to put your money where your mouth is. So there we go. So thank you.
Dueling super chats. I like it.
There we go. All right. So I do want to talk a little bit about the recruiting impact for Nick Saban leaving Alabama, because you've already seen there was already one 5-star receiver who was committed to Alabama, didn't sign in December, and then is essentially reopening his commitment, reopening his recruitment before he signs in February. Didn't sound like that was one where Ohio State might get involved, but boy, Alabama has a lot of talented players, and a lot of talented players that Ohio State has been trying to recruit over the years. Caleb Downs being probably the one that is sort of first and foremost, probably in a lot of people's minds, and in a position where Ohio State might not mind having another talented 5-star type player. How big of, this is when you lose your head coach, the transfer portal opens up for 30 days. Anyone who is at Alabama can jump back in the portal. Yes, the transfer portal window closed as soon as Nick Saban said bye. That portal opens up again for 30 days. Is there anyone, Kevin, that you think, other than Caleb Downs, who I think is sort of the obvious one, is there anyone that Ohio State has been involved with in the past in terms of high school recruiting that, if that person went in the portal, you think that would be sort of at the top of Ohio State's list?
What is Caleb Downs? Oh, you told me not Caleb Downs. Yes, most of the roster, to be quite honest, but I think that Keon Keeley is a name that makes sense. I think you could sit there and look maybe on the offensive line. I mean, I don't know. I mean, J.C. Latham had kind of a rough season. So did Seth McLaughlin. If we're really looking at things, if you believe the PFF numbers, I mean, Ohio State and Alabama recruit against each other all the time. So there's not going to be a shortage of guys. So I think really what it comes down to is you look at what Ohio State's needs are, and then you cross-reference it against what Alabama has, and that's kind of where you go. So we know, obviously, offensive line, they probably would love to get a tackle, so you look at the tackles for Alabama and see what's going on there. While I don't think that Caleb Downs on the surface is addresses the greatest need Ohio State has, he's Caleb Downs. He's pretty damn special. You've tried to figure that one out. I've not had a chance to really go through Alabama's roster because the last time I watched Alabama, they were just I can't even come up with the word. They were just staggering around the field against the team up north and never really got to see any offensive player do anything of consequence in that game. So you can be sure that Mark Pantoni and the staff at Ohio State is certainly creating a wish list and then seeing who takes advantage of the 30-day portal entry. I still don't necessarily have clarifications of once that happens, if you have to actually file NC2A paperwork to go into the portal, how that system works. I assume it works under the normal mechanism of you have to actually go to the effort to enter the portal. But there are probably a lot of high school coaches out there of all the Alabama kids who are getting phone calls of, so is your kid happy down there? And just, however you can keep it just one level away from direct contact.
Yeah, if you look up and down their recruiting classes, you just see a bunch of tackles that Ohio State missed on, even Olas Alinen is a freshman this year. Caden Proctor, another one, and J.C. Latham was already mentioned. So there are guys that Ohio State fans would be familiar with, and obviously the Ohio State staff would be familiar with as well. I mean, shoot, even a guy like Ty Lockwood at tight end who used to be committed to Ohio State was a freshman this year. Richard Young, the running back that Ohio State was in on for a long time, was a freshman this year for Alabama. Somebody asked if Keon Keeley played. I do not see any stats for him this year, so I'm going to assume that's a no. But, that's a guy right there that they could get involved with. And frankly, given the way Ohio State is going to lose defensive ends after this year, assuming they get JT Tuimoloau back, and again, when we say this year, we mean 2024, there could be some opportunities for some playing time in 2025 and frankly even this coming year as they try to get ready for what is to come. So this is going to be I was looking at on Twitter to what kind of tweet, what kind of gift should I throw out there? Should it be one of those like wedding dress rushes as the doors open, people just women are beating each other trying to get to the dresses, or Black Friday type of thing? I think that's what you're going to see. Like, if Tim Beckman was still at Illinois, he would be, he'd have a stand set up across the street from the stadium with, the doctor is in, come see me type of thing. Would be trying to talk to anybody he could, man on the street stuff. And, I think you're going to see a lot of coaches in terms of maybe third uncles, street agents, things like that. But any more texts and DMs and say, hey, are you happy? How are things? What are you thinking? Or you're talking to parents, hey, how's the coaches? You're talking to high school coaches, confidants. Every single player on that roster that is any good, and 80% of the ones who aren't, are going to have people reaching out about them.
Well, and I've seen people saying it's still Alabama. They're going to hang on to all their people. You got to remember where we are in the college football calendar. You can't have other people going into the portal until April. Everyone else's people are already in the portal or already, are stuck on their rosters for several more months. Everyone has holes to fill. Ohio State is not the only team with holes to fill. And players from Alabama give you an opportunity to upgrade your roster pretty much every program, pretty much every position group. So you've got the market is now potentially open, and I think people are able to, slide through the side door to get to people, whether that's contacting parents or contacting third uncles or contacting high school coaches. You're going to have the Tim Beckmans and, the modern, better versions of Tim Beckmans doing that. And this is, do you remember Hodor from Game of Thrones, where he's got to just stand there and hold back this horde of people trying to go through the door? That feels like that's going to be Alabama's personnel people, because Georgia would be able to improve their roster with some of the guys from Alabama. Ohio State would be able to improve their roster with some of the guys from Alabama. Everyone would be able to improve their roster with some of the guys from Alabama. You got to figure, if everyone is going to make an offer for your guys, not that ever happens, but if everyone is going to make an offer for your guys, you can't match everyone's best offer from for 40 different players at the same time when you're also trying to hire a new coach. I think you're going to see some talent matriculating in and out of Tuscaloosa over the next 4 to 6 months. Super chat?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, especially when you're talking about guys that may have 1 or 2 years of eligibility left, I think the assumption is that Alabama isn't going to lose its brain and hire a Shula or Mike Price and go through that rigmarole again.
Rich
Rod. There certainly could be a year or two of transition that happens. And if you only have a year or two of eligibility left and other schools are out there and kind of matching the dollar figures, and 2 or 3 of these schools that are looking at you are in one of the Power 2 conferences, because let's be honest, it's the Big Ten and it's the SEC. I don't think that there's really a lot holding you back. You could sit there and say, yeah, it's Bama. Well, that's all well and good. Ohio State, Georgia, hell, Iowa. I mean, places have helmets and shoulder pads and scholarships and breakfast buffets and all of that, just like Alabama does. I mean, maybe Clemson's the only place that has slides, but they're in the ACC. So I think we are going to see some matriculation. But then what we'll see is wave 2. And let's say hypothetically Alabama goes and hires Dan Lanning from Alabama or from Oregon, and then we get to the spring portal, then there'll be a mass exodus potentially out of Oregon, not only of players trying to follow their coach to Alabama, but then the players too that are like, well, we just lost our head coach. So we're going to have a lot to talk about here. We may have seen a shortening of the portal windows, but this late coaching change will create more ripples, and there will be players in the portal for, the foreseeable future.
Well, and I'll just say, people talking about Alabama will keep their players. They've already had 20 players transfer since the end of the regular season. So players are leaving while Nick Saban is there. That's just the way of the world, as Tom said.
And you're also, I think, going to see, you have for years seen the sort of, as Kevin said, ripple effect where school A hires school B's coach, and then they, maybe you have players follow that coach. Well, school B's got to hire a coach, and if they're hiring a sitting coach, then school C gets involved. And you kind of have this ripple effect down the line where, at some point, maybe, if it is Dan Lanning, maybe Phil Knight can keep most of those Oregon guys at Oregon. Maybe. Or maybe they want to follow Dan Lanning from Oregon to Alabama. That means Brian Hartline might get a second crack at Jeremiah McClellan if Dan Lanning leaves Oregon, and then Oregon potentially has their whole roster opened up to potentially the portal. So this is, I don't think this is necessarily the way that the powers that be around college football wanted this to be or were aiming for this to be, but it's the way it is. So that is something that is going to be a big story to watch, sort of the ripple effects from this. Moving down the line of college football, wherever door number 1 is that they hire their coach from, and then door number 2 and door number 3 that follow. Super chat from Fort Wayne Buckeye. Odds Saban joins game day next year. I don't know where he's going to go. Wherever he's going to go, he is immediately going to be probably the single best former coach on TV. If you ever watch Nick Saban press conferences, or my real favorites are the Nick Saban play of the week, where he's just sort of diagramming something on the TV, and it's just very casual. And at the end of it, you're like, oh, I understood everything he said. And like, he explained it so well, and it's so personable. He's got such a great personality that you never really saw. But man, I don't know if he's going to end up on Big Noon or game day. But man, oh man, wherever he is, that is going to be the show to watch.
I think it would be ESPN if he does any television, and here's why. His familiarity with the SEC deal is on ESPN, ABC. Fox has no piece of the SEC deal. While that doesn't necessarily mean that he couldn't talk about the Big Ten and whatever other conferences, it just makes too much sense. I think it is a way to sunset Lee Corso a little bit. You have Nick Saban, for Pete's sake. I think that really rounds out the roster. Maybe find a way to lock Dez in the equipment closet and go on and profit.
Who says
Tony?
No?
Tony, you want to say anything? You want to say literally anything?
Well, I think let's find out exactly why this was such a quick retirement. Because as people have reported, like, he was interviewing coaches yesterday, and then suddenly kind of decides, you know what, I'm done. So maybe he just wants a break from all of it right now, and maybe it's not such a quick turnaround, but he is great on television. He's great when he's doing like bowl game studio shows and things like that, where they're already out or whatever, and he's the halftime or the pregame. Like, he's good with that. He's not unlike his commercials with Dion. That's kind of just how he is. It's very, very surprising based on the gruffness of what used to be Nick Saban, but he's kind of softened the last couple of years, and that's probably, guys, why they have not won any national championships of late.
Do you guys have a favorite Nick Saban press conference moment? And we're going to keep it PG, so you may have to sort of tap dance around it, because a lot of the great Nick Saban press conference moments are not necessarily PG. I have 3. I tweeted about it on Wednesday night after the news broke. But do either of you have a favorite Nick Saban press conference or media appearance kind of rant or quote or anything like that?
Now, it might have been a coach's clinic thing or a booster thing where He's talking about Miss Terry, his wife, about how like he stole her from some guy and who now like owns a gas station or something. And, you know, he drove her by there like, a few years back and like, wow, look, you could have had a gas station, something to that effect. And then she had some sort of retort. I don't remember what it was. I just know it was hilarious.
He's driving, you know, sees a guy she used to date in high school or something, and he's working at the gas station in because they're both from West Virginia, and he's working at the gas station, and you know, managing the gas station, whatever small West Virginia town. And you know, Nick says, "Boy, can you imagine if you'd married him? You'd be living here, married to someone who runs a gas station." She goes, "Hell, if I'd married him, he'd be the head coach of Alabama." So yeah, that's a Miss Terry story. There was a great Miss Terry story where, you know, Nick is talking about, you know, being responsible with your relations with others, and, you know, don't get involved with someone who has more to, you know, unless they have as much or more to lose than you do. And there's a great punchline to that story. I'll let you figure that one out on your own.
Don't Google it.
Yeah. Kevin, do you have a favorite Nick Saban? Because I have three that I'll go through in a minute, but
I do. My favorite one I can't repeat right now, so I'll just take any reference to rat poison, to be quite honest, because I just think all of that is funny, especially when he has a bottle of Coca-Cola in front of him too, and there's probably got to be some ad exec that's like, oh, that's not the image that we're going for right now, but yeah, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard my favorite story, and I just sent it to you in the private chat.
I'm gonna check that. Yeah, that's the one. So there are three that I really love. Though I tweeted on Wednesday night, I tweeted out a clip. He's doing his radio show, and coaches, when they do the radio show, you know, I think you've found over the years that it used to be everyone just took calls from the audience, and then they sort of got to the point where they didn't want to take calls anymore because they would get, you know, if you remember the Dabo Sweeney radio show from earlier this year, there was an incident on there. They don't necessarily want to do that, so they found ways around it. There was a caller named Pee-wee into Nick Saban's radio show. This is a few years back, and Pee-wee would rant and rave about how they were doing everything wrong. And a few weeks later, Pee-wee called again, and Saban says, "Oh, Pee-wee, I'm so glad to hear from you. We have been having so much trouble protecting, even when they're rushing for. I'm hoping you can provide some guidance here to help us get through this rough patch." And it was just like, man, that is a guy who understands how the game is played and understands how it works. So that was a good one. If you just Google Nick Saban and Tin Horn, that's one of the great rants of all time. They were playing. It was like one of the, you know, it was the SEC SoCon Challenge Week, midweek press conference. And, you know, it was sort of like, well, obviously you're going to obliterate whoever you're going to play. And he went off on this long rant about, I think it was the Citadel. It might have been Georgia Southern. I mean, this is probably like 10 years ago, a team that had just run all over them in the first half of a game. So if you Google Nick Saban and Tin Horn, you will find that one. And the other one is not Nick Saban at the podium, but it was Jordan Battle, speaking of former Ohio State commits who ended up playing for Alabama. A reporter asked him, you know, do you have any favorite sayings from Coach Saban, you know, that he uses to motivate you or something like that? I'm just going to say, if you just Google Jordan Battle, Nick Saban, and D's, you'll find it. You've kind of heard the punchline already there. The best part of that video is he cites a couple of examples, and then on the second one, you hear what I can only assume is a sports information director in the back of the room just kind of yelping, "No!" And boy, it is one of the great moments of this century of sports press conferences. Josh Engels, thank you for the super chat. Always appreciate your support.
But that's his request.
Yes, Josh says, "I'm used to you guys at 1.5 times speed. Can you speak faster, please? I am doing my very best. If I drink coffee at this hour, I'll stay up. So that is not an option." So Mega Slow says, "I want to know what Phyllis from the Feinbaum Show feels about this." Boy, the Feinbaum Show tomorrow is going to be an all-timer.
Fire.
An absolute all-timer. Okay, so we do have one more piece of news. Speaking of, hey, there's been a lot of news today. This is the kind of thing that we would have done an entire show about not that long ago, or on a typical day. By the way, Ohio State landed a top 100 defensive end, Zahir Mathis. That happened on Wednesday, today. That would have been normally, this is the morning show. Hooray, lots of conversation about this. We're 50 minutes in. Oh, by the way, Ohio State landed a commitment from a top 100 defensive end today. This is a position, Tony, where we talked earlier about Larry Johnson and maybe are they working on a succession plan there to sort of mitigate some of the retirement rumor stuff that they have to deal with every year. If you go back the last couple cycles, this is a spot where they desperately need to be bringing in some additional talent because they've had kind of thin classes the last couple of years. This is, Edric Houston this year, Josh Mickens the year before, but this is a position where, Larry Johnson is going to go down as one of the great recruiters in Ohio State history, but man, oh man, this feels like a real big win for him given everything that's going on.
Yeah, and when he talked about his commitment, he talked about Larry Johnson wanting to play for Larry Johnson and that being the biggest draw for him. So getting Zahir Mathis in early in terms of the commitment, because for years, the last few years when they've missed out on defensive ends, it's like Ohio State leads for so long, but there's no commitment. And by the end, you can see the writing on the wall that they're going to go somewhere else, the defensive ends. And so now you've got him. Obviously, you've got to keep him. But this is a really good start for Ohio State. I think 4 of their 6 commits in 2025 are on defense, all pretty highly ranked and will continue to rise up the rankings. Zahir Mathis, I think, is the number 37 player in the composite. Kind of Mark and I talked about this on the Skull Session Recruiting podcast yesterday or so. Kind of a Zach Harrison build in terms of height. He's 6'6", 230. But more bend than Zach Harrison. So really intriguing prospect that obviously a good start and a reassuring thing in terms of the Ohio State recruiting, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up Mika Hanna's comment because this was something that Mark and I talked about on the Skull Session Recruiting podcast today about his commitment, and we were talking about what the class could look like. Justin Hills, who's in state down in Southwest Ohio, Zahir Mathis, London Merritt, who was outside of Atlanta, now he's at IMG Academy. That could be your 3-man class right there, and that could be done by June or July. And then maybe you go big game hunting for one more defensive end at this point. Obviously you have to address defensive tackle. Justin Hill, you have to really like Ohio State's chances there. Drop to top 10, Ohio State's in it. London Merritt visited Ohio State multiple times. I always am like, well, I'll believe they get a kid out of the Southeast when they get the kid out of the Southeast, and they do pretty well. Maybe South Florida creates a little bit of drama, but IMG is a little further up. But, as for Mathis, I think that he's somebody that by the time you get him to college, you can get him up to 245, 250. He is just a different type of athlete. I think that he would fit very well. And since Ohio State missed its number in both this class and the previous class, going and getting 3 or 4 ends is going to be very important. And as we talked about earlier, if Ohio State is able to go out and makes the decision to go and pursue Jason Taylor, and, that gives them, again, as I said, that continuity plan that, okay, maybe Larry isn't going to be there for your entire career, Zahir, but, this Larry or Jason is going to be here. So I think all of that's very important.
All right. We're coming up on an hour here. There are a couple of questions we had starred to get to real quick. So we want to run through some of those. If you have anything else, feel free to throw them in our live comments. But Signy Yog says, does it seem a little dirty that Saban signed a top class and went through portal stuff and then left? I think I would wait to find out the why behind the decision in terms of, there are rumors out there. We don't know the why behind it. There had been sort of rumors that he was at least thinking about making this his last year, even a few months back. But I think one thing that makes that not dirty is, 10 years ago when you signed a guy and then his position coach left the next day, he was stuck and he had to sit out a year if he wanted to transfer unless you release him from his scholarship. That's not the case anymore. As soon as he leaves, the floodgates are wide open, and as many Alabama players as want to enter the transfer portal can enter the transfer portal. So to me, Tony, this is a very different thing than it would have been 10 years ago.
Yeah, and reports now from a few people saying that Saban told the team age and health concerns were the driving factors behind this decision. So obviously being at his age, how long do you want to do this? And this is shocking because it happened today. It's not shocking that 2023 was his last year, because and honestly, once we started seeing all of the home and homes a few years back being scheduled, we're like, well, he's getting ready to retire. That was one of the obvious signs at that point. But yeah, this is this is what all coaches do in terms of they don't. I don't think this is unseemly or anything like that. You hit the point where it's like, you know what, I've had enough. And really anything that Nick Saban does, I think you give him all of the leeway in the world because he's the best that's ever done it in college.
One thing that's crazy is we were at Nick Saban's last national championship game. It didn't feel like that was going to be Nick Saban's last national championship when it happened, but in 2020, the COVID year, down in Miami, Ohio State, a real shorthanded Ohio State team against a very, 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 very talented Alabama team. That was, I guess, Kevin, there was everyone was always sort of in a hurry to tell you that, oh boy, this is why Nick Saban's on his way out, and he's never going to be able to get to the mountaintop again. You'd had those conversations. You'd heard people have those conversations, and oh boy, the game's passed him by, and oh boy, just Georgia's passed him, and this team's passed him, and he's never going to get back there. And boy, that 2020 Alabama team, that was a dominant and incredibly talented team.
Tough Borland is still running toward the end zone at this point. Somebody had to say it. I kind of want to get back to the comment about the signing the class and everything. I think that we certainly don't know for sure the reason everything happened. I don't think that there was any gotcha or anything else. I mean, some players who are early enrollees, well, I've already unpacked my clothes. I really don't feel like moving again. But there, as Tom mentioned, there's, there are things in place. You got 30 days to enter the portal and be able to move and everything else. So that's not an issue. But as for the other question, we've been hearing for years that, okay, he's going to do this. Okay, he's going to leave after 20. He wanted to go after a championship. No, he's not going to leave after that. That's the COVID year. That one isn't necessarily the right year, but sometimes there are things larger than the job itself or whatever that create these crossroads that you come up to, and you have to make certain decisions. And some of the things that are being bantered about or out there are true. I mean, I don't know how you don't step away, and you hope the best for everybody involved, and you just kind of you go forward with it. But it's going to be interesting. We're going to probably be doing more than just this show talking about Alabama, at least in an indirect fashion.
All right. And David Greenshield Super Chat says, I will never forgive Saban for 1998. Tony tried to bring that up earlier. We weren't going to have him do it, but hey,
Sure.
Yeah, that was, I think, the first time a lot of people really were sort of aware of Nick Saban. It was just sort of like the Michigan State coach, and Ohio State was a 24, I think, point favorite in that game, and had that game essentially won in the third quarter, and a series of unfortunate events unfurled. And as Tony said earlier, boy, that game basically led to him probably getting the LSU job a year later, because they went 6-6 that year with that, and then went, I think, 10-2 the next year, and then Saban took the LSU job. But yeah, that is still, I think, the single most shocked I have been after a football game, where it wasn't, you go through and there's, John Cooper losing to Michigan, John Cooper losing to inferior Michigan teams. You sort of like, 1996 Michigan game, like, boy, that was a really surprising result, but it wasn't unheard of. The 98 Michigan State game, I know, Brian Ferentz hanging 55 points against Ohio State in 2017, the Purdue game in 2018 are probably up there in terms of unexpected results, but that 98 Michigan State Ohio State game is still one of the most shocking games I can remember, Ohio State or not, period, anywhere.
I remember sitting in the stadium just unable to move as the game was over and people were filing out. And we've talked about it so many times. That was going to be a national championship season for Ohio State. They had the best team. Everybody knew it. They were ranked number 1 from the start. And then that happened. But we don't need to start the show that way. We don't need to end the show that way. What else can we talk about?
I don't get to tell my 98 story.
No.
Okay.
All right. Let's check in with Len. It says, how does scholarship limits play into landing more players from the portal? I mean, in the case of Ohio State right now, they're under 85 at the moment, so it's really not a concern. You don't have to be at exactly 85 until August when camp opens. So if you're at 90 right now, there have been plenty of years when Ohio State has been at 88 this time of year. It's not a problem. At this point, reality is after spring ball ends, the portal opens up again, you're going to have more guys leave. We see that every year at every program. The guy who is the third year, fill in the blank, fill in the position, who realizes that the second year guy has passed him already on the depth chart, and boy, the path of the playing field is not as clean, as easy as he thought it might be. That guy hits the portal. You're going to lose. I think every program in the country is going to lose a half a dozen guys after the spring, 4 to 6 guys, every single program. So yeah, numbers are not really a concern right now in terms of bringing guys in from the portal for Ohio State. And from Josh, will Tim Walton's cornerback recruiting help attract more defensive ends? Better corners equals more sacks. That's an interesting question.
Every recruitment is different. So, it's hard to put a blanket answer down on that. Obviously, I think that defensive recruiting has started to pick up as there has been proof of concept of Jim Knowles' defense. We were seeing classes that were tilted very heavily toward the offense when Ohio State's defense was kind of sucking wind. And now that it's getting better, I think we're seeing better results in terms of the recruiting. I think that Tim Walton will be heavily involved in what he can be involved in, but you can't go out there and say, okay, we need to get a 26-man class and we're gonna try and land 13 defensive players. Tim, we want you to be involved in the 45 players that we're pursuing and hold up the standard that you're doing in your own position recruiting. It's easy to try and play the cause and effect thing, but I don't know how much that is really going to be thought about in the moment when you're trying to figure out where the best place is for you and looking at the big picture and playing the jigsaw puzzle. I think that seems to be a little too much underwater 3D chess for how high school recruiting goes. Maybe I'm a little jaded, but that's kind of my view.
Super chat from 505 Brutus. I assume talking about the Saban retirement. I'll bet he was disgusted with the NCAA's handling of the cheating saga. That NIL and the portal helped him decide. Also, when are you guys putting the Connor Stallions action figure on the market? Tony, does the Connor Stallions action figure have a real kung fu grip? Thanks. I'll hang up and listen.
We don't need to do that because I'm assuming that Michigan will do it on their own as much as he is being celebrated by the fan base and by the way he is, cheering himself on through all of this. And so I assume Michigan will probably honor him. I don't know when they're having a parade. So I'm going to assume he may be the grand marshal at this point. So I don't think we need to go ahead and do that because Michigan will be doing that on their own.
He's really turned into G. Connor Liddy in their own little Watergate scandal. I am sick and frickin' tired of hearing about him.
He will have a radio show eventually.
He will definitely have a radio show eventually, or a podcast. Not just anyone can have a podcast. You've really got to earn it. So, yeah, that I am going to
get your degree from the Podcasting Institute.
Podcasting Institute. I do wonder if Connor Stallions being so publicly out there and celebrated, and boy, you see him on Instagram every single week, don't you? Celebrating and drinking beers and getting drinks bought for him by Michigan fans. I know this isn't going to factor into the decision, but also, don't you feel like you're kind of taunting the NCAA in a way? Like, not that the NCAA is looking for, is out to get Michigan or anything, or needs any sort of additional motivation, but when the university president's tweeting bet and tweeting about how great it is to have Jim Harbaugh back on the, and how much he loves Jim Harbaugh. And I think that's probably not the approach that's going to win you friends at the NCAA headquarters in Indianapolis, but we'll see how that all shakes out.
Apparently, and people were talking about in the chat, Charlie Baker came out, and I guess there was some sort of interview, and they came out and won it fair and square or something. It seemed, I haven't read it myself, so I don't know, but there were other people that came in and said, yeah, I read it too. So I guess it's something to check out over at ESPN. Some comments from NC2A President Charlie Baker that may not jibe with documentation that is in the hands of the Council on Infractions.
Well, they won the national championship game fair and square, but that's not the...
Well, they held all night, so I don't even know about that.
There is that, and I don't know how much we want to get derailed by that. Go ahead, Tom. This is your thing.
Now that we're an hour in, I think we probably don't want to get derailed by that at all. I did want to address the first part of that, which is I think that for a lot of coaches, and especially if you're a coach in your 70s, having to deal with the brave new world of the transfer portal and NIL and all that kind of stuff, and recruiting being different than it is, and roster maintenance being different than it has been, I think, if you're thinking like, I could come back for another year, or maybe not, or, in the case of younger coaches, I could come back to college, or I could take a job in the NFL. I do think you're going to see some people kind of deciding like, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe it would be a little easier to have a league where everyone's just sort of under contract and you don't have to constantly re-recruit everyone every 3 weeks.
Although now that I don't know how much longer we're going to go here, so I will just and since we're talking about Charlie Baker, Yahoo's Ross Dellinger saying that by August, the NCAA could be implementing the schools just doing their own NIL thing that he proposed, where the NIL just gets brought in house and the schools pay the players. So that is a significant move that looks like a lot of optimism for that portion. I don't know what this means with collectives and all of that, but schools being able to pay players is 18 different shows. So
yeah, that's again would normally be the first thing we talked about and the topic of the entire show, and here we are an hour and 7 minutes into what was going to be probably an hour-long show, and just now mentioning it. So I'm going to guess that we'll probably talk about that more in a coming show at some point as things get a little more fleshed out. We'll see how that goes with Charlie Baker. But just to recap, in case you're joining us late, Donovan Jackson back, Jordan Hancock back, Denzel Burke back for Ohio State in 2024, Parker Fleming not back, Matt Guerrieri back at Ohio State, going to be the safeties coach, Jason Taylor, maybe, ? Certainly some smoke around that in terms of some sort of a transitional thing, maybe with the defensive line coaching position, which would leave James Laurinaitis potentially as a grad assistant for another year. Oh, by the way, Ohio State is apparently still looking for an offensive coordinator, and we'll see how the coaching changes on the offensive side of the ball shake out after that happens. Oh, yes, Nick Saban, the greatest coach in the history of college football, also retired today. What will that mean for recruiting and Ohio State being able to potentially reopen recruitments or reopen relationships with guys who they have attempted to recruit in the past, who ended up going to Alabama? We'll find out. Oh, boy. Oh, and Ohio State got a top 100 defensive end today, literally today. Huge recruiting news, and that is the 74th thing. Tony is putting one finger up, which means something else has happened. Tony, have they decided to turn touchdowns into 17 points?
No, I just want to say two things. One, just imagine this defense this year, if Ohio State could somehow convince Caleb Downs to transfer to Ohio State. Imagine him in that secondary. Secondly, Ohio State had 3 juniors announced that they're returning today. Do we see 3 more tomorrow with Travion Henderson, Emeka Egbuka, and JT Tuimoloau?
It's certainly possible. The deadline is the 15th. Marvin Harrison has not announced. Marvin Harrison is turning pro. I hate to spoil the surprise. I know there's always like one person in the chat who's like, well, he hasn't announced yet, is he? No.
Oh, let me go find it.
No, Marvin Harrison's not coming back. But yes, Emeka Ibuka, JT Tuimoloau, Trevion Henderson, all potentially coming back still. We will have, I'm sure, I'm going to guess we'll have breaking news podcasts when those things happen, because boy, those are going to be pretty consequential decisions one way or another as well. That is plenty of news still to come. So you know what? My advice to you, friends, number one, hit that thumbs up button right now. Also, number two, hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel. Number three, hit that bell in case you have not already done that, so you get notified when we do these live shows, when an absolutely insane, ludicrous amount of news breaks all at the same time, very inconveniently spaced. There's a long off season. We do not need to do everything all on one day, friends. Let's space this out a little bit. Yes, CJ Stroud did wait until the last second and did, in fact, turn pro. So, yes, we'll see. We'll see. There's still decisions to come, but Ohio State got three very good pieces of news in terms of juniors returning for 2024, coaching staff changes, recruiting news, potentially more recruiting decisions coming in the coming days and weeks. I think there's some stuff to talk about right now, and I think there's some stuff to talk about at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That is where Kevin and Tony and I cover the team. Mark covers recruiting. Mark has been very busy this week. It feels like every time I log onto the board, Mark has written another column or another insider report. Lots of stuff going on right now on the Huddle board, presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And of course, find us on your podcast platform of choice. Just search Buckeye Huddle. Find all of our shows that way. You can subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating and review. And then, of course, at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle as well. I think that's it. Unless any news has happened in the last 13 seconds, I think we have officially
I just looked at Twitter.
I think we have at least fought today's news cycle to a draw. Tomorrow's another day. Can't wait. Oh, Tony's got a finger up. You checking which way the wind's blowing?
Alabama students are chanting anyone but Dabo in front of Bryant-Denny Stadium.
Do you think it's too soon to talk about Alabama at Dabo Swinney press conferences? And can we ask Greg Schiano about that?
No.
Okay. Maybe not yet. All right. Well, thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow when who knows what else will have happened.